Moments with Mark, Mark chapter 8, verse 22. Jesus here heals a blind man. And there are some lessons for us in this miraculous story. When they arrived at Bethsaida, some people brought a blind man to Jesus. Friends do that. Here we find that there were some friends that brought a blind man to Jesus. It's a reminder of how we should bring our friends to Jesus, point them to Jesus. When they arrived at Bethsaida, some people brought a blind man to Jesus, and they begged him to touch the man and heal him. This was going to be a personal encounter that would change the man's life forever. So Jesus took the blind man by the hand, led him out of the village. Then, spitting on the man's eyes, he laid his hands on him and asked, "Can you see anything now?" Now, here is a story that is really elaborating on the previous passage that we read about the disciples not quite getting Jesus' teaching. Notice verse 24. The man looked around and he said, "Yes, he can see people, but I can't see them very clearly. It's a little fuzzy. They look like trees walking around." Now, I have worn glasses for quite a while, and if I take off my glasses, I can hardly even read big print because my eyes are getting, with age, more blurry, more fuzzy. And so I can imagine this man who could not see, but then when Jesus touched him and healed him, he could see things, but he couldn't quite see them clearly. And it's really an object lesson on the previous passage where the disciples couldn't quite get Jesus' teaching. It wasn't quite clear to them. And so we see in verse 25, then Jesus placed his hands on the man's eyes again, and his eyes were opened. His sight was completely restored, and he could see everything clearly. Jesus sent him away, saying, "Don't go back into the village on your way home." Now, we see this gradual process or progress of this man's healing. First, it was kind of blurry, and then Jesus finished the healing, and it became clear in his sight of the surroundings around him. And so that happens to us in our spiritual journey sometimes. We don't quite get what God's getting at in this lesson or our journey with him at this moment in life, but in time it will be clearer. The thankful thing is that God keeps working with us and having patience and mercy with us. In verses 17 and 18, we see where the disciples were not quite getting Jesus' teaching. Just like this man couldn't quite see clearly, the disciples couldn't quite get Jesus' teaching. In our lives, we want more clarity on some things, don't we? We'd like to have more clarity about what's after this life. We'd like to have more clarity about some of the big questions of life and suffering. We'd like to know more details from God. And so sometimes we ask God our why questions. And sometimes we'd like to have more clarity, but sometimes we don't get that more clarity. And so we just have to trust, have faith, rely on God and where he's leading us. I hope in your life, sometimes God has maybe given you clarity, and in some areas maybe not so much clarity. But I would like to encourage you to keep walking in faith. Take it step at a time. Somebody has written a song saying that someday in the by and by, we will know all things better. And that's true. We see through a glass darkly, 1 Corinthians 13 says. but someday we'll see things more clearly.